The idea is to start with a board of 7 that is as representative as we possibly can of the community, with 7 spots, like 7 days in the week, or as some of you may receive, or you'll hear as we get into sacred geometry, the seed of life, which is kind of it's known as the Genesis pattern. But the idea is to begin with 7. You don't stop with 7. It would continue to expand from there. But the idea is to have a board of 7 initially, which would then be phased out with elections. So let's say we started with 7 board members. We would randomly select one of those 7 that would be replaced on month 3 as an idea. And then they would be elected, most likely in a way similar to how block producers are elected today, because that's the only voting system that we have at present. But as identity on the blockchain emerges, there are other methods of voting that we as a community could agree on in terms of how these people are elected. Maybe on month 6, 2 more of those board members that are randomly selected would be replaced by those that would be voted in using whatever mechanisms we agree are best and available at that time. 2 more on month 9, 2 more on month 12, so that after a year you have a fully elected board using these types of mechanisms. And the reason for doing it over time is so that you have continuity. You never want a board to change all in one moment. And a board doesn't really do much other than hire and fire the CEO, or in this case of a nonprofit, the executive director. And so we're also talking about that executive director most likely probably serving for the first year. And then when there's a fully elected board, the board would then take on that responsibility. We're talking about Thomas Cox, being that initial sort of founding executive director. And any of the people and any of the names, there's no one saying this is how it has to be. This is just the beginning of a conversation of something that we hope to implement over the coming weeks. This is just a conversation. Everybody's involved, everybody has a voice, and everyone's opinion matters. So please, be part of the conversation. But that would then have a team around it. The primary function of that team is communication, with community sort of leaders that can connect with the BPs to understand from a block producer's perspective what matters, what their needs are, so that we can form consensus around views in every instance, around dApps, around exchanges, etc. But building out a team that can effectively communicate with the rest of the industry so that as much as possible, we can try and speak with one voice so that the public can understand us better. I mean, right now, we are not effectively communicating we're not effectively communicating internally, let alone externally. And this is the reason why something like this is important. I mean, right now you essentially have 2 constituents with a voice. You've got Block 1 and you've got the BPs. And neither of those groups are communicating as well as they could or probably should. And there's a lot of voices not even being heard today. And so the idea is to create a structured vehicle to facilitate conversation, but building out that team. And that team would need to be represented by, again, all of the regions of the world that matter and all the constituents that matter. And so if this is something that you would like to be a part of, if this is something where you have ideas of people that should be a part of it, people that understand what stewardship is, the idea of service, that's what this is. Obviously, this is an organization that would be entirely transparent in every way. That goes without saying. But we'll do that. And then, terms and turnover, all this stuff is, going to be an ongoing conversation over the coming weeks. And obviously, as everyone in this room, please be involved. These would be, and then in these groups, so you'd have call it a starting board of 7, but we'd start to build committees around each of these centers of gravity. And these committees would also be comprised of people from within the community, a group that's focused on, call it the Constitution. That's a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to figure out a process and a structured conversation around how do we create consensus around that Constitution. The same thing for arbitration. There's still a lot of concerns around how these things are going to be handled going forward. the worker proposals. Another interesting thing that's come up and worth talking about is the exchanges. One of the things that's happening today that really bothers me is how the exchange listing fees have become such a problem. And I don't criticize any of the exchanges for this. The exchanges have a very difficult job, which is they've got every application under the sun trying to get listed. The amount of inbound requests are, insane, beyond anyone's ability to filter and process. And so what they did is they created a listing fee and then continued to increase that listing fee as a filtering process, saying if you can pay a lot of money, that probably means you're a good project. Now that's not reality. And there are a lot of good projects that can't afford to pay a $5 million listing fee. And some of these exchanges are charging fees like that for a single exchange. When someone completes an ICO and brings in 10 or $20 million, some of these ICOs are spending nearly 100% of what they've taken in their token offering just to get listed. That's not okay. That is not, I think, the environment we're trying to create. And some of the exchanges have stepped up and said, we don't like it either. They go, the EOS community is different. And some of these exchanges have expressed an interest in an organization like this actually assessing projects. They say, as a community, you can do a better job of vetting EOS dApps than we can. We would much prefer an independent third party comprised of the community assessing what's good and what is at least meeting, call it the basic parameters necessary to qualify. Not someone picking winners and behaving in that sort of fashion, but trying to figure out some sort of criteria by which to evaluate things and saying, tell us what we should list. And so this is another area which I think could be very compelling to the sort of EOS community, because this would really set us apart in terms of EOS dApps not having to pay tens of millions of dollars to get listed on all the exchanges. The exchanges saying, great, if the EOS community can self-regulate and actually self-filter, we're open to having that be how we list tokens for your community. And that's solving, I think, one of the largest issues in the community at large. This is, I think, a very big problem. And obviously this would continue on in all the areas where we need assistance, where we need help. And over time, these things may break apart into their own foundations. It's not like there's an idea of saying, how do you create as much around one entity? These may end up being independent bodies down the road as well. Obviously, we're all focused on decentralization. But the idea is to build committees, and each one of these would probably be comprised of 7 people initially as well. And so if these are areas that you care about, if these are things where you've got strong opinions and you think that you can add value and you're willing to be, willing to serve and contribute your time, please let me or anyone else involved know. This is an ongoing conversation. I don't think we need to get into this in too much detail. I think everybody understands where we're going with the Constitution, but I think this document, this Constitution that's being created right now, is probably, what started with the Magna Carta might end here. Arbitration as well, please, if this is an area where you think you can be of value and have the time, please let us know. Same thing on the worker proposal front, lots to figure out here. Worth stopping here, I guess, for a moment to talk about how this would be funded. This would be funded by the community. Anyone that wants to get involved would be able to donate to this entity. There's a number of people that are, myself included, willing to contribute sufficient resources to this entity that I think it can be funded well enough to do all the things that we're talking about. And I think it could continue to do that indefinitely, as long as we are a thriving community. But one other thing that might make sense is this might be something where the worker proposal might be relevant. I don't think it's needed, but it's an option, and it's something that we as a community will continue to discuss and decide. And I think we've covered this well enough. But it's worth talking about this. It is, we are a big global community, and this organization